Hello, thank you all for joining us. We're going to be meeting with Adam Isacson, who is with the Washington office on Latin America shortly. And we've asked him to talk with us about what's happening at the U.S. Mexico border and why what's happening is taking place and what we might be able to do about it. So thank you for joining us. And thanks for joining us on these previous conversations. We've been really happy with the number of people who are watching live, the number of people who tune in afterwards and watch the recorded replay. And we're thinking now about doing this as a regular thing. So every Thursday, 7 o'clock Central, if that works for you, we want to introduce you to another amazing person week after week who will help us better understand some of the issues that are happening in our country or are most important to us at this moment. The other thing that I want to try to do going forward is include more of your questions and comments in the conversation. So if your Instagram screen looks like mine, there's a question mark button somewhere near the bottom, and I think you can press on that and it allows you to pose your question, and then I on my side will press on it and read your question at some point during the conversation if I think it's pertinent and will add value to what we're learning. So I mentioned we're going to be meeting with Adam Isacson. He directs the Washington Office on Latin America's, or WOLA's, Defense Oversight Program. He may explain to us what that means, but I'll just tell you I've known Adam for a long time, probably since I got to Congress in 2013, so for about 10 years. And he and the folks at WOLA, but especially Adam, really helped me as a member of Congress understand what U.S. foreign policy was helping and hurting us when it comes to Latin America, and maybe specifically the Northern Triangle, countries like Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras. And he's the kind of guy that not only comes and visits the border, which he has, but he goes and visits the country from which people are fleeing, these countries in the Northern Triangle or countries like Venezuela or other places in the Western Hemisphere. He really tries to understand the root causes of migration and this refugee challenge that we have right now. And he also seeks to understand where we can do better when it comes to U.S. policy and where we've made some mistakes in the past that we might want to correct going forward. So that's who we're about to hear from. I'm going to look to see if he's asked to join and then bring him in to the conversation. All right, so far, I don't have Adam requesting to join just yet. So Adam, if you're out there, I think you hit that plus request button and then you're able to join us. When Adam does, we're going to ask him, why are so many people trying to come to the United States right now? Is this just happening at the U.S. Mexico border? Is it happening in other places in the Western Hemisphere? Is it happening in other parts of the world? We're going to ask him why all the walls and the razor wire and the buoy barriers and these other forms of deterrence and cruelty are not working. And after we get his take on that, we're going to ask him what will work. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the cities and communities that are especially impacted by migration to the United States. Those are cities like Eagle Pass and Del Rio, El Paso, McAllen, Brownsville, but there are also cities like Chicago, Washington, D.C., New York. And then we're going to take your questions as well. Hopefully we can get him on. Let me check those who've asked to join. And you know what? I don't see his name here. I'm going to check my text messages, and no, I see the text message saying he's requested to join, but I don't have him. I've got some other people that we may want to talk to, including an Astros fan. Congratulations. Oh, hey, here's Adam. Here we go. All right, he should be spooling on soon. Hey,
Hello,
Adam.
Beto. How are you? Sorry, I watched your whole intro, but I didn't know where the button was. I guess it
That's
was like
okay.
mixed way down in the comments.
No,
Hello.
I'm still figuring it out. It's good to see you. I think I mentioned to those who had tuned in early that I got to know you as a member of Congress,
Hmm.
and though I am from and was representing a part of the U.S. Mexico border, I really wanted to better understand what was driving the migration that we were seeing in 2013 and 2014, which was different
Right.
than the migration that we had seen before. A lot more families coming up, a lot fewer, single adult men coming up. And you were so helpful to me. But you also, I think the last time I saw you was on my front
That's right.
porch here in El Paso, maybe at the tail end of the pandemic, because I remember we didn't invite you in, which felt very rude, but we had to meet outside to make sure that we were keeping each other safe. Thanks for joining us. I've already kind of read out your credentials and a little bit about the Washington Office on Latin America, which is about to celebrate its 50th birthday. I think it started in
That's right.
1974. And just what an important role WOLA plays in helping policymakers do better going forward. And that's the reason that we asked you to join us today. So let me start with the question that I think a lot of people are struggling to answer for themselves and for the country. Why are so many people coming to the United States of America right now?
It's something that's happening all over the Western Hemisphere. About 21 million people in all of the Americas are on the move right now. And we are only getting maybe 2 million of them every year. So, Colombia, for instance, about 5% of the people in Colombia came from Venezuela since 2015. 5% of people living in Costa Rica came from Nicaragua since 2018. Mexico is going to have 150,000 asylum requests this year. It's a regional phenomenon. Why are people leaving? One is just violence. Latin America has they have 8% of the world's population and a third of the world's homicides. It's very unsafe for a lot of people, especially if you live in like a poor slum around a city that's dominated by gangs. There's nobody there to protect you. There's nobody there to keep your kids from being recruited by the gangs. You've also got very authoritarian governments. There is a chance of being just thrown in jail on the smallest whim in Venezuela, in Cuba, in Nicaragua, even nowadays in El Salvador, and in other parts of the country. There are some countries that it's very, very tough to be a woman. If you're a victim of domestic abuse or sexual abuse, you can't really count on the government to protect you. A lot of women are leaving for that reason. Um, you know, a lot of people are coming up through Latin America. Probably as much as 15% of people coming this year are from Europe, Asia, and Africa too. They're coming up through Latin America and coming up because they're fleeing similar problems elsewhere in the world. Even just worldwide, this is probably the most refugee flows, the most migration we've seen since World War II. And we're just experiencing some of that.
21 million, um, and the numbers you gave relative to the rest of the world, it sounds unprecedented. And you mentioned,
Yeah.
Since World War II, I wonder if it's even bigger than anything that we saw in the Western Hemisphere,
So,
not talking about Europe
yeah.
and Asia, but in North America and South America at any point. And we'd probably have to add in that we're seeing huge migration challenges in Europe and Asia, out of North Africa, across the Mediterranean. So this is happening everywhere. But of course, we're uniquely interested in the United States because this is where we live. And it is a major driver right now, not just of US policy and the different proposals that are being debated in Congress and by the administration, but it's also shaping our politics. And it will likely be one of, if not the leading issues that help to decide the outcome of the 2024 elections, including the election for president. So another question that I want to ask is related to the first. So you've kind of answered why people are coming to the United States, and you've clarified that it's not just to the U.S., that you've got a lot of people coming to Colombia, a lot to Costa Rica, a lot to other countries in the Western Hemisphere. But we have really doubled, tripled down on deterrence as a strategy in this country, and especially in the state of Texas.
Right.
Tell us why walls, these floating buoy barriers, the razor wire that Governor Abbott has deployed, the quadrupling of the Border Patrol since 2001, why is that not working?
One reason it's not working is because, as you were talking about at the beginning, the profile of the migrant coming here has changed. Yes, there still are single adults who are just here to get a job and they don't want to be caught and they're going to try to avoid Border Patrol by going through the most remote deserts. But now it's at least two-thirds. The majority of migrants who are coming to the U.S. Mexico border every month want to be caught. They want to stand on U.S. soil because asylum law says if you're on U.S. soil, you have the right to ask for protection in the United States. They're looking for Border Patrol agents to turn themselves into, to start the asylum process. They're coming for protection. So how do you deter someone from asking for protection? The only way to do that, and maybe Greg Abbott is trying, is to make it as unconscionably miserable as possible. But even there, I don't think we can ever make it more miserable than life amid the gangs in San Salvador or, under repression in Venezuela. I don't think we should try to do that. So we're always going to lose in that deterrence game if this is a population of asylum seekers.
What's the answer then? Because I think there are going to be some people who hear you say that and aren't going to be able to accept it. Are you telling me that we're not going to be able to stop these people who are coming to the United States of America? Do we just open the borders and let everybody in? Is there going to be no rule of law anymore? Talk about what it means not to focus on deterrence, but to manage the flow of people who are requesting asylum or status in the United States.
Let me back up for 1 minute and say why we bothered to do asylum to begin with. Asylum wasn't really a thing until World War II, when the United States, many countries in the Americas and Europe, we turned away Jews and others who were fleeing, annihilation. Boats came, we turned the boats back. After that, in the years after World War II, most of the world decided we weren't going to turn away people, at least not people on our soil anymore, who would be put back into likely danger if we were to send them back to their countries. That became a human rights violation. And in 1968, the United States ratified the Refugee Convention. In 1980, we passed the Refugee Act, saying it doesn't matter how you got here. If you're on US soil, you have at least the right to due process. So that's what we have to do. We have to give due process. I think when the United States passed those laws, it was the Cold War. Maybe we were thinking of like a small number of white Eastern Europeans fleeing, and we would just process them a little bit at airports and stuff like that. We weren't thinking of, tens of thousands of people coming from the Americas. But, even now, what that process looks like right now, well, it's a mess right now, but once it does get to trial in the U.S. immigration court system, nearly half of people are qualifying for asylum. So, it's not a needle in a haystack thing where just a few of them make it. You are taking in people who would face a pretty strong chance of dying if we were to send them back. Unfortunately, yeah, we are set up though, as you also mentioned, we built walls, we've built up Border Patrol. We have created a border apparatus really designed to hold back terrorists or to hold back economic migrants. We expected that people would be just held in jail and then deported for a while, but that's not what asylum is. We have not built up the apparatus that we would need to actually process these cases, get them tried in a quick way. So the mess we have right now is if you do have even just an abnormal number of people coming and trying to turn themselves in, you see these images of people waiting under bridges just to be processed, just to start filling out the paperwork. You see families and children being held in these Border Patrol holding centers for way longer than those are meant to be held, be used for, people crowded in, for lack of processing capacity. As boring as that is, there's not that capacity. And then when people do apply for asylum, and this isn't really fair to anybody, they'll get a court date, but that court date could be in 2028 or 2029 because it is so backlogged. We only have 659 immigration judges in the United States, which may have been enough 20 years ago, but it just isn't now. So the backlog almost becomes its own draw. You come here, we're not going to detain you for 5 years. We're going to release you into the United States. And then you get to be here for a while, even before ultimately a court decides, with due process, we hope, whether you qualify or not. And if you don't qualify, then you have this whole other challenge then of sending back somebody who's been in the country for 3 or 4 years. People should be able to get that decision as quickly as due process allows, which could just be, in most cases, a matter of, months for the most part. But because we have not invested in this new profile of migrant, which isn't even that new anymore, we're talking about 10 years now, we are still set up for this sort of terrorist migrant scenario. We have these backlogs and we have a really messed up system.
You gave us the context of these asylum laws that were introduced and signed into law in the wake of World War II. And there's a a story from the period before these asylum laws were adopted that really stays with me, of the SS St. Louis
Absolutely.
that had more than 700 Jewish refugees fleeing Nazis in Germany and the Nazi takeover of the European continent. And they tried to come, I believe, at first to Cuba, then to the United States. And the government of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, someone whom we put up there as one of the all-time great United States presidents, incredibly progressive, a humanitarian, his administration sent the St. Louis back to Europe. And we know that hundreds of those on board would die in concentration camps during the Holocaust. And so with the perspective of history, we can look back on the late 1930s, early 1940s and say, well, if we were in that position, we'd never turn that ship of refugees back to certain death. And I feel like we're in that position right now. And I think about what history will say about those of us who are alive in 2023, when there are mothers with very young children who are fleeing almost certain death if they stay in El Salvador or Honduras or Haiti or you name it, places that literally can no longer protect human life, where their kids will be pressed into service in gangs, will be raped, will be prostituted, or will be killed. And they're doing what any of us, certainly what I would do with my kids if I knew that my kids faced death or that kind of brutality in our home country. I would go somewhere else where my kids would be safe. And so what you're talking about is making sure that we honor our asylum laws, that we honor this tradition that has developed in the United States and in much of the world after World War II, but that we do so much better than we're doing right now. And I like that you are acknowledging that right now it's a mess. So for anyone who accuses anyone else of liking what's happening right now or being for open borders or disorganization or chaos, I don't think anyone, whatever your party affiliation or wherever you live, could be for that. No one likes what's happening right now. You started to hint at some of the things that we could change. You named, or you talked about the number of immigration judges, for example, or how long it takes to adjudicate an asylum claim. So let me ask you this. What could President Biden do, especially given the fact that we don't have a Speaker of the House right now and our expectations of Congress are lower than they've ever been? What could he do from his office to improve things at the border?
Yeah, that's an important point. I mean, here at WOLA, we've almost given up on legislative strategies other than the budget and, hold a hearing, make a statement, but we don't count on Congress to change some pretty broken fundamental laws right now. That's going to be on hold. So while you can't change the laws, President Biden could increase what are called legal pathways, ways that people can maybe even avoid the journey, get into our refugee system, if they're not facing asylum, they can get into temporary work programs. If they do actually make this whole horrible journey to step on U.S. soil and ask for asylum, you can invest a heck of a lot more in processing capacity. Ideally, somebody shouldn't have to crawl under Greg Abbott's barbed wire in order to get on U.S. soil and talk to Border Patrol. They can show up at a port of entry, one of the legal border crossings, go up to the CBP officer there and say, I fear going back to my country. I want to apply for asylum. To the Biden administration's credit, they have, using a cell phone app, which is also controversial, but using this app, they've created 1,450 spots per day for people to actually do that. That's right. CBP One is the name of the app. And they've made some improvements to it. The human rights community has some criticisms for how it works, but it is certainly a much larger number of people that they can now process at the official boarding crossings than they used to. It's a much, much orderly way to do asylum, to just have people wade across the river or climb over the wall and wait for Border Patrol to pick them up. It makes a lot more sense. That number probably has to go up to reflect the current situation in the hemisphere. And I'm afraid that might not be popular with everybody in Texas, but that's the reality of the world right now. It's also the reality of the U.S. job market, and we can talk about that. So processing, that just initial check people's backgrounds, start their asylum cases, decide whether they're a flight risk or not, and if they're not, leave them inside the United States to ultimately get a work permit and contribute to the United States while their asylum case goes through. That involves also keeping tabs on them. I mean, you're releasing people, but you want there to be what they call alternatives to detention. You're going to be monitoring their whereabouts. Hopefully you have a case officer that they have to check in with. You want to make sure they hit all their court dates. And that needs more investment as well. And I know I'm getting wonky here, but this is the parts of the system that Biden administration could increase right now just by moving budget funding around. Ultimately, then you do need more adjudication. You need more judges. If you had more judges, more courtrooms, asylum officers able to make some of these decisions themselves, you'd have a lot more of a workforce, which would reduce that workload and make those cases be decided more quickly. And while you're releasing people in the United States, which ultimately, yeah, you can't detain 1 million people and you don't detain children, you're going to have to do this, coordinate with the cities better. A lot of mayors of big cities right now are complaining that the federal government is neither providing aid nor even much of a heads up that people are coming. And that is something that the Biden administration could be doing much more of through FEMA and through HHS and other parts of the federal government. Again, the Biden administration has been taking steps in that direction. I'm not going to tear them up here. I think they've been too cautious considering the scale of the number of people coming.
Let me turn to a question from one of our viewers. This is from Zoe, or Zoe, and she asks, what could we be doing in the countries from which people are fleeing, or how do we address the root causes of this? And
right.
You may, this is a long list of things to touch on, but you might want to talk a little bit about some of the things that we've done that might have contributed to why people are leaving right now over the years in Latin America, and then what the United States could do positively to address these challenges instead of further exacerbating them.
Sure, happy to talk about that. And yeah, one frustrating thing about working on migration is that you are working on an effect. You are not working on a cause. You're just trying to manage the outcome of other things that happened before. And nobody wants to leave their country. Nobody wants to leave their home. You have to get, but this is actually, before I even get into that, I was talking to a reporter in Honduras a few months ago. And he says, I work in this newsroom and my other reporters, some of them have left the United States. They lived in fine neighborhoods. They were middle class. They were doing fine for themselves. But one guy who was a sports reporter told me, he says, I'm doing fine, but I have hope for myself, but I don't have hope for this country. So that's a remarkable thing to say. And then they left because of that. How do you get people to have hope for their country? And before I even get into that, one is, undoing some patterns from the 20th century that the United States directly or indirectly contributed to. Latin America, coming out of the World War II, they were pretty prosperous. They were mostly democracies in the 50s and 60s. The Cold War hit Latin America pretty hard. It's one of the most unequal regions in the country. It's one of the most unequal regions in the world, in terms of just inequality, the distance between rich and poor. The wealthy really cut most things for themselves. And during the Cold War, in the name of anti-communism, the United States propped up some of the wealthiest elites and the dictatorships and didn't do enough for the poor. And those dictatorships ended up really eradicating an entire generation of reformers and democracy activists and people who really could have actually modernized their countries. They have really a lost decades or a lost generation, and they're still trying to make that up. And that's not all the United States' fault, but we were not helping for much of the Cold War, sort of blinded by anti-communism during many administrations. Okay, so now you've got that pathology still playing out now. How do we help address root causes? A lot of it, this is where my community perhaps has trouble. There's no short-term fix for that. We are not going to suddenly make Honduras safe but in a way that respects human rights. We're not going to build on institutions that have been allowed to dissolve and crumble for a generation within a couple of years. We have to get on the side of the honest people, the reformers, the people who are interested in the rule of law, the people who actually share the vision of having their country be more modern, having the country have a healthy middle class, having the country, again, be a place that the majority of the population has hope in, and back them up, without wavering. And there are examples. There have been some crusading attorney generals. There are human rights groups. There are people in, really brave investigative reporters in the media. There are honest cops and generals. There are, members of Congress who are very reformist. They often end up in exile or in jail, too often, still today in many of those countries. And Some of that is because while the U.S. government has gotten a lot better about supporting them, taking their picture with them, giving them financial aid when they need it, giving them technical support, it's not always constant. Sometimes other interests take precedence. Perhaps the traditional elite or a corrupt leader also happens to be really anti-China. We like that. Or they're really good at blocking migrants, and we like that. Or they're going to sign a free trade agreement, and we like that. And those interests still conflict. So we have to be more constant in our support for the reformers. But yeah, the fight to improve root causes in the region is a long-term fight, and we just have to stick with it for more than just one presidential administration.
Yeah. And I like the way that you put it. When you're working on migration, you're really working on some of the symptoms or the outcomes of root causes and drivers that really should command our attention and our focus and our resources. And I love the work that you and Wola have been doing on that. And I hope that more policymakers in this administration are listening to you. We're going to wrap up, but as we do, Adam, I wonder if you could leave us in the midst of, an unprecedented migration challenge in the Western Hemisphere, the mess that you described that is our current policy. I think our president is trying to do his best. I think he's absent a partner in Congress, and that Congress is just unwilling to take this on, or at least the Republican leadership right now is unwilling to take this on. You mentioned some things that he might be able to do going forward, but I guess as we close, you've been doing this work for a long time. There's a lot of heartbreak involved. You're seeing a lot of tragedy and a lot of trauma, but there's got to be something in it that gives you hope, or you wouldn't stay in this line of work. What's giving you cause for hope right now?
Oh, there's so much. I mean, WOLA works by partnering with people in civil society in those countries, in all of the countries. And there are, I just rattled off human rights advocates, journalists, honest people on the inside. There are people who work every day at enormous personal risk in every country to change and make their countries better. A level of risk that, people might send me a nasty comment on social media every day, but nothing like what these people face, yet they keep going. And there are people there to replace them. And we're talking even in the poorest and most dangerous neighborhoods or most difficult rural areas of the country. And, actually not just Latin America, geez, I mean, go to El Paso and talk to some of the service providers. I can name so many organizations. If I name one or two, the others are going to be like, hey, wait. But there is an amazing community in almost every border community in Texas and elsewhere that is fighting the good fight, and also just, shelters, asylum lawyers. And they often work in the face of quite a bit of hostility too. But I mean, there's so many people to inspire you all the time. Probably the trick is to get out of your office and get out of Washington as often as possible to get to meet them. I'm going to Colombia for a couple of weeks in a few days, and I'm looking so much forward to seeing the folks who are fighting this fight in their own country.
Well, we wish you safe travels, and we're really grateful for your time tonight and for the work that you've been doing and the work that you will do with WOLA, and hope that we get a chance to join you again, maybe get an update on your trip to Colombia, and continue to talk with you about solutions to these challenges that we have here. So thanks for joining us, and we wish you the best.
No, thank you. And so I'm really grateful that you brought this whole subject up, and I'm happy to continue the conversation. Thank you for doing this.
You got it. Thanks everyone for joining us. We're going to sign off. Adios.